Hello, all you wise ones. Welcome to today's Walking in Wisdom. We're dealing with Psalm 52. By the time David is writing these words, Saul has already tried to kill him 16 times. Imagine that. This is a maskil, so it's written to bring us into a state of enlightenment, to enlighten our walk throughout our life. Yes, but this psalm is a dark psalm. So can God bring his light into your darkness today? God can do a lot in dark places. And if you will allow him to reveal his word to you, to receive what God has to say, then you'll find your life has a little more light shining in it than it perhaps did yesterday or the day before. So the background to this psalm is provided in the title. David sought sustenance in the house of Ahimelech, priest of Nob, a descendant of Eli. But Doeg the dog, happened to see him there. Doeg was an Edomite. You might remember Herod the Great, who slaughtered the babies in Bethlehem. He was an Edomite. The Edomites were related to Israel, but they were bitter enemies of God's people. In spite of this, King Saul, took this Doeg the dog, into his confidence. And Doeg went and told Saul, "I saw David enter Ahimelech's house." And Ahimelech inquired of the Lord for him, and gave him provisions and the sword of Goliath. Stop right there for a moment and understand that God intends us to wield the weapons of our enemies. The weapons that our enemies have used for evil. And he wants us to take those weapons and bring them into God's service. The very things that the enemy has used against you, like Goliath was intending to use his sword against David, the very thing that the enemy has used against you, God is going to place in your hands so that you can do God's service. Well, back to the story. Ahimelech knew if Saul found out, if he found out that he was helping David, that it would cost him his life. And it did. Saul went with his army to Nob and confronted Ahimelech, and then ordered the death of the priests. Nobody in Saul's army would kill the holy men except Doeg the dog. 85 priests and their families were slaughtered. And then he put the whole town to the sword, men, women, children, cattle, sheep, and donkeys. It's not just you that the enemy is after. It's not just pastors and missionaries. The enemy doesn't stop until he destroys everybody and everything. Only Abiathar, Ahimelech's son, escaped to join David. And when he told David what happened, David said, "I am responsible for their deaths." Psalm 52 details how to live with the decisions that we make when our decisions have an impact on those around us, especially upon those that we love. There are decisions that you will be making for God, and all of your decisions will have an effect upon those around you. And sometimes we can be hesitant and reticent to make those decisions because we're worried about how it might affect those around us. You need to understand, if we obey God fully, it's going to have an impact upon others, and it's going to cost people around us, perhaps even more than it costs us, because we're committed. We're committed to God, but they're not committed to God. And so it's going to be a costly adventure for them because they feel like they're losing their hold on you and their control of you. and your place in their lives, that's a scary thing for those around us. That's where the real pain lies, and it's real pain for us because we don't want to hurt those around us. If I have to pay the price, then I can live with that, but my obedience affects everybody else. And it's especially costly for those in my life who do not follow Jesus. All their plans are dependent upon me playing a certain role. And those plans are going to be ruined because I'm following Jesus. Plans that my parents have, plans that my children have, plans my wife has, plans my husband has, plans the people in leadership with me in church have, plans those in the church have for the church, plans. Everybody has plans. Everybody has ideas about how we should be living our lives, but we need to be committed to the plan that God has for us. But there is a cost. All of our plans are ruined whenever we choose to follow Jesus. A radical obedience to Christ will ruin the plans of our friends and our families, all of the plans that they had for us, plans that my parents had for me, ruined when I followed Jesus. Plans that other people had for me, that they had a life intended for me. Ruined. Plans my mentors had for me. Ruined when I chose to follow Jesus. Because Jesus has a plan for me. And his plan is God's plan. God's plan is the plan that I must choose to follow. So I come home one night and I say to my wife, honey, I've sold everything and I've given the money to the poor. What's she going to do with that? Jesus asked that of the rich young ruler. Perhaps the reason why the rich young ruler said no was because he was thinking of his wife and children, not being able to go to that private school, not being able to take those holidays overseas together, not being able to buy that perfume she likes, not being welcomed at the golf club anymore. And so he counted the cost, and the cost was too high for him to bear. Bear in mind, the cost is the same for us all. When Jesus spoke to the rich young ruler and says it's going to cost everything, sell everything you've got and come and follow me, that's the same thing that Jesus asks of every one of us. And the expectation is the same, because the expectation is obedience. Obedience to God affects all of our relationships. We could prevent their suffering, but not if we're going to be obedient to God. We must let the cost be paid. Think of the cost that Mary paid when Jesus began his ministry. She was told when he was born that a sword would pierce her soul, and Jesus had to let her go through all that. We have no right to think that the types of relationships that we have with others should be any different from those of the Lord Jesus himself. When we try to bear all the cost ourselves, we limit everybody's progress. We limit what God can do in everybody's lives around us. It's our involvement in the universal purposes of God that immediately affects those that we're connected to. It's our role to obey God, and it's God's role to take care of those who suffer the consequences of our obedience. My, that takes some trust. Living like this is a sacrifice of worship. Think of Abraham taking Isaac up that hill, thinking that Isaac was going to be sacrificed. Think of Sarah back there waiting for her son to return. Our decisions affect all of those around us. Now in verse 9, finally we get to a little bit of Psalm 9. Actually, we've been talking about all of Psalm 52, Now we're going to get to a little verse in Psalm 52. In verse 9, it says, I will thank you forever because you have done it. Just a little short verse. These words bring to remembrance the last words that Jesus spoke upon the cross. It is finished. You have done it. and thereby it casts a light upon our ultimate purpose in life. All obedience is in reality taking up our cross. It may seem like a death experience to us, but on the other side there comes a resurrection. It may cost you and those around you all that there is, but God takes our obedience and saves the world through it. Well, that's the wisdom that we find in Psalm 52. It's a tough word. God help us to live it out. It's a mysterious word. We don't know what the consequences will be of our obedience. We never know what the consequences of our obedience to God will be. We have to trust that God will take our obedience as an act of sacrifice, as an act of worship, and trust that he will save our family, save our neighborhood, save the world through it. I pray that God will give you the strength to obey, and that you will see the blessings that will come through you living obediently to Jesus. Give him, God, I pray that you will give to everyone listening the strength to carry their cross this day. And we'll see you again tomorrow.